My brother became fixated on my wife, sending fake intimate photos and messages to her workplace, claiming they were having an affair, and stalking us for months. I, at 28, never imagined I would be sharing something like this, but my wedding day turned into an absolute nightmare because of my younger brother, Jake, who was 25. I got engaged to Emily, who was 30, last year after dating for 3 years. We met at my best friend Mark's backyard barbecue when she had just moved to town. She accidentally spilled her drink on my shirt and spent the entire evening apologizing and trying to help clean it up, somehow managing to make me laugh through the whole ordeal. The connection was instant and undeniable. While I was helping her dab at my soaked shirt with napkins, we discovered we shared a love for obscure indie bands and both secretly enjoyed terrible sci-fi B-movies. By the end of the night, we found ourselves in a quiet corner of the yard, completely lost in conversation while the party continued around us. We exchanged numbers and have been inseparable ever since. Emily is everything I could ask for: kind, brilliant, and successful in her career as a software engineer, and absolutely devoted to our relationship. She has this incredible ability to make me feel understood and valued in ways no one else ever has. When she talks about her work designing healthcare applications, her eyes light up with such passion that it's impossible not to be drawn in. Growing up, Jake and I were incredibly close despite our 3-year age gap. We shared everything: clothes, secrets, and inside jokes that drove our parents crazy. We even had our own made-up language that we used to pass notes in school. Our teachers thought we were writing gibberish, but we had an entire coded system that only we understood. It became our special bond, something that was just ours in a world where it felt like adults controlled everything. When our parents went through a brutal divorce, Dad cheated with his secretary, the classic story. Jake and I helped each other cope. I was 16, and he was 13. We would spend nights huddled in my bed, planning our future perfect lives where nothing bad would ever happen. We promised to always protect each other and never let anyone come between us. On particularly bad nights, when we could hear Mom crying through the walls, we would sneak out to the backyard with flashlights and look at the stars, making up stories about alien worlds where families stayed together forever. The change in Jake started gradually during his freshman year of college. He joined a fraternity, and suddenly his whole personality shifted. It wasn't just the typical college experimentation or finding oneself, it was like he became a completely different person overnight. Where he once had quiet confidence, he now had a brash arrogance that made me uncomfortable. His Instagram went from posting about books and art to endless gym selfies and shirtless photos. He would call me late at night, slightly drunk, bragging about how many girls were sliding into his DMs and how he could get any woman he wanted. I tried to be understanding. College is for finding yourself, right? But something about the way he talked about women began to worry me. They weren't people to him anymore, they were conquests, trophies to be collected and displayed for social media approval. It hurt to watch my sweet, funny brother turn into someone who only cared about attention and validation from women. The brother who once spent hours helping me build elaborate cardboard forts was now spending thousands of dollars on designer clothes he couldn't afford and documenting every moment of his carefully curated life online. When I first brought Emily home to meet the family 2 years ago, Jake's behavior set off alarm bells that I stupidly ignored. He arrived 3 hours late to dinner, claiming he'd been at the gym, though the strong smell of cologne suggested otherwise. He came downstairs in a tiny tank top and short shorts in November, giggling at everything Emily said and constantly finding reasons to touch her or sit next to her during dinner. He somehow managed to bring up stories that highlighted his athletic achievements and barely concealed references to his dating life. He would text me before family dinners asking if Emily was coming, then show up with his hair styled perfectly and wearing his most attention-grabbing outfits. If Emily complimented him on anything, his watch, his haircut, anything at all, he would wear or display it prominently at every subsequent meeting. I convinced myself he was just being friendly and outgoing, especially since Emily never seemed to notice or encourage it. The wedding planning process is when everything really went off the rails. I asked Jake to be my best man, partly because of our history and partly because Mom pressured me, saying it would hurt Jake's feelings if I chose someone else. At first, Jake seemed thrilled, helping with Pinterest boards and venue ideas. His enthusiasm seemed genuine, and for a brief moment, I thought I had my brother back. But then the criticism started. My dream suit was too plain and boring, my cousin, then even with her 66-year-old aunt, got completely wasted on champagne and started sharing my most embarrassing teenage moments and failed relationships with everyone. He brought up my college ex who cheated on me, embellishing the story to make it sound like I was somehow at fault. He detailed my brief emo phase in high school, pulling up ancient photos on his phone and passing them around the table. He even described in graphic detail the time I got food poisoning on a first date and had to rush to the restaurant bathroom. Emily finally stepped in and told him he was being cruel and inappropriate. Her voice was calm but firm, the same tone she used when dealing with difficult clients at work. "Jake, I think you've had enough to drink. This behavior is embarrassing you and hurting your brother. Maybe it's time to call it a night." Instead of apologizing, he stormed out, screaming that we were all just jealous of his youth and beauty and that at least he knew how to have fun. He knocked over a champagne tower on his way out, sending glass and alcohol cascading across the floor in a dramatic exit that ensured no one would be talking about anything else for the rest of the evening. I should have uninvited him from the wedding right then, but my mom begged me to give him another chance. "He's going through something," she insisted, the same excuse she'd been making for him since he hit puberty. "He's your brother, your only sibling. You'll regret it forever if he's not at your wedding." Jake apologized the next morning, blaming it on the alcohol and promising to behave at the wedding. His eyes were red from crying, and he looked so much like the little brother I had protected all those years that I wanted to believe him. That was my first mistake. The wedding ceremony started beautifully. The garden was perfect, with spring flowers blooming along the aisle and soft music playing as our guests found their seats. The weather was gorgeous, sunlight filtering through the trees to create dappled patterns on the grass. Seeing Emily tear up as I walked down the aisle made all the stress worth it. She looked radiant in her simple but elegant dress, her smile brighter than I'd ever seen it. Then we got to our vows. I had just finished mine, my voice cracking with emotion as I promised to stand by Emily through whatever life brought us. As she began to speak, her eyes locked with mine in a moment of pure connection. Jake shot up from his seat, screaming, "This is wrong. This whole thing is wrong." His voice echoed through the garden, shocking everyone into silence. He was crying. "Emily, you can't do this. We have something special. Tell them about our connection." The one he could never understand. He rambled about late-night conversations when I was asleep, completely untrue since Emily works early mornings and is always in bed by 10. He described secret meetings and messages that had never happened. He called me a manipulative jerk who had tricked Emily into proposing, who was keeping her from her true happiness. Security had to drag him out while he kept screaming that Emily would realize her mistake soon. My mom was sobbing, her carefully applied makeup leaving dark tracks down her face. My dad looked ready to disown Jake on the spot, his expression a mixture of rage and mortification. All our guests were whispering and recording everything on their phones, the sacred moment transformed into viral content for their social media. Emily held my hand, her grip tight enough to hurt, and we somehow finished the ceremony, but the whole thing felt tainted. That night in our hotel room before we left for our honeymoon, Emily finally showed me what had been going on behind the scenes. With shaking hands, she unlocked a folder on her phone labeled Jake Evidence and showed me months of harassment I had known nothing about. Jake had been messaging her constantly through every social media platform. He would comment heart emojis on all her photos, even old ones from years before she met me. When she blocked him on Instagram, he made new accounts to keep contacting her. He would reply to her professional posts on LinkedIn with inappropriate comments about her appearance. He sent her long, rambling messages about how he understood her better than I ever could, how they were meant to be together, and how she was making a mistake being with me. Some messages came at 3 a.m., stream of consciousness walls of text declaring his love. Others were more sinister, suggesting he'd been watching her, noting details about her routine or what she wore to work. Emily had been blocking and deleting everything, trying to handle it quietly to avoid family drama. "I didn't want to come between you and your brother," she explained, downcast. "I thought he'd get over it or that I could manage it without involving you." She showed me screenshots where she repeatedly told him to stop and that she would never be interested in him, disturbing notes attached. He calls and texts constantly from different numbers, saying he made a mistake and needs to explain that Emily is sending him mixed signals. He needs to clarify. I blocked him on everything, but now he's messaging other family members, claiming I'm keeping Emily away from her true love. I wanted to wait longer before updating, but things have spiraled so far out of control that I need to write this down just to process everything. Our honeymoon in Hawaii should have been perfect. The resort was beautiful, the beach pristine, and the little bungalow we splurged on offered the privacy and romance we'd been dreaming of. But coming home was like walking into a tornado of fresh chaos. The day after we got back, Emily's work phone started ringing non-stop. Jake somehow got her direct office line and began calling 30 to 40 times a day, telling anyone who answered that he needed to speak to her about their secret relationship. Her company has this policy where all external calls get forwarded directly to people's desks to ensure no client calls are missed. Emily had to sit through call after call of Jake crying, screaming, or trying to sound seductive while claiming they'd been having an affair for months. The next day, he escalated further, starting to email her entire department doctored photos of them together. He must have spent hours working on these images, taking pictures from Emily's social media accounts and skillfully editing them to create scenes that never happened. In one, they appeared to be kissing at a restaurant Emily had posted about visiting with coworkers. In another, they were embracing on a beach that I recognized from our own vacation photos. The photos were obviously fake to anyone who looked closely. One had visible distortion around the edges where he'd meshed two images together, another had inconsistent lighting between their figures, and the third showed them supposedly kissing in a location Emily had never even visited. But at a glance, especially to people who didn't know better, they looked convincing enough to raise serious questions. Emily had to have this humiliating meeting with her manager and HR to explain that her brother-in-law was having some kind of breakdown. They were understanding but insisted on documenting everything in case Jake escalated further. They assigned someone to screen her calls and flagged all external emails for review before they reached her inbox. He did escalate. Blocked from digital contact, he started showing up at her office building during lunch hours, wearing tight clothes that matched what I typically wear, styling his hair like mine, and trying to catch her in the parking lot. The first time, he chased her car all the way to the street, pounding on her window at stoplights and screaming that they needed to talk. The second time, he tried to convince security he was her husband, bringing her lunch while wearing a wedding band similar to mine and carrying a bag from her favorite restaurant. Now there's a photo of him at every security desk with instructions to call the police if he shows up again. Emily has started carpooling with a colleague, too afraid to walk to her car alone. She jumps at unexpected noises and checks the locks multiple times before going to bed. The most devastating part isn't even Jake's behavior, it's how many family members actually believed him. My Aunt Lisa, who I've always been close to, called me sobbing about how she knew Emily was too good to be true and that she'd had suspicions from the beginning. My cousin Tom started posting cryptic Facebook statuses about how women never change and that karma comes for cheaters, tagging me in thinly veiled references to the situation. I tried explaining to everyone that Jake was lying, that Emily had never even been alone with him, that we had evidence of his fabrications, but they kept saying I was in denial, that Jake would never make up something like this, that there must be some truth to it if he was so convinced. It felt like I was going crazy. These people have known me my whole life, known Jake's history of attention-seeking behavior, seen how he acted at the wedding, and they still chose to believe his obvious lies over me. The breaking point for my mom finally came last Thursday. She and Dad were asleep when Jake showed up at their house at 3 a.m., completely wasted and barely coherent. He started pounding on their door, screaming that he needed their help to win Emily back because they were truly in love and I was keeping them apart. When they refused to let him in, trying to calm him through the door, his behavior turned destructive. He grabbed one of Mom's prized ceramic plant pots, a family heirloom that had belonged to her grandmother, and threw it through their living room window, glass shattering everywhere, some shards narrowly missing my dad's face as he stood shocked in the darkroom. Dad called the police, but Jake ran off before they arrived, disappearing into the night like a ghost. Mom found his phone in the bushes the next morning, looked at Emily with suspicion and disdain, making snide comments about women these days within her hearing. My mom has finally stopped defending Jake. The revelation of his fake Instagram account broke through her maternal denial. But she still hints that maybe we should all sit down together and talk things out as a family, that with the right therapist present, we could work through this misunderstanding. She doesn't understand that there's no coming back from this level of betrayal, not from Jake and not from everyone who took his side without a second thought. Things have taken an even darker turn, and we finally got a restraining order against Jake. I really thought after our mass email exposing his lies he would back off and get help. The evidence was irrefutable, his deception laid bare for everyone to see. Instead, he escalated to a level none of us expected. Last Tuesday, I was working my regular 12-hour shift at the hospital when Emily called me in a complete panic, her voice so high and breathless I could barely understand her through her sobbing. She had been working from home since the office incidents, converting our spare bedroom into a makeshift office. Around lunchtime, she went to the kitchen to make a sandwich, taking a brief break from a video conference. When she came back upstairs, she found Jake in our bedroom, going through our closet and dresser drawers. Clothes were strewn everywhere, drawers pulled out, intimate items displayed on the bed. He had climbed in through a small window in our guest bathroom that we sometimes leave cracked for ventilation. The terrifying part is that he knew exactly which window we leave open, meaning he'd been watching our house, studying our habits and routines. When Emily confronted him, he didn't even try to run. There was no shame, no embarrassment at being caught breaking into our home. He just sat on our bed crying, surrounded by her clothes he had pulled out of the closet. He kept saying he just wanted to be close to her, to smell her clothes and feel her presence. Some of her things were pressed to his face, others carefully arranged around him in some sort of ritual that made sense only in his disturbed mind. Emily said he was talking in this creepy calm voice, as if what he was doing was completely normal. He told her he'd been doing this for weeks, whenever both of us were at work, just sitting in our room and imagining their life together. Emily managed to stay calm enough to get to her phone and call 911, keeping Jake talking until police arrived. He didn't resist arrest, continuing to speak softly about their special connection even as officers handcuffed him. The police found a notebook he left behind in his room.